Well, good afternoon, but also good morning and good evening to some of you. Welcome to the webinar organized by NRD Companies together in association with the European Commission on what is, we believe, a very important subject, particularly these days. Unfortunately, we still live the times when it is not possible to completely forget the COVID-19 situation. And we've all lived through, we learned a lot of things, and we realized what are the things that can help us going forward during these difficult times, but also when these difficult times are over. Now, this particular webinar will be focused on national ID, with a particular focus on the digital national ID. I think this is the item that so many countries have either said, oh, we're so lucky to have it, or on the contrary said, we should have thought about this before and be ready for events like happened now. So to cover this subject, we have a very esteemed panel of speakers that will be able to cover issues starting with the policy making, combining policy with the legal aspects, taking it much broader from the digital ID to the national ID level, and also we'll be able to have a look at some specific example of how one country has implemented that. Now, I mentioned this webinar is organized in cooperation of NRD Companies and the European Commission. I know that European Commission needs no introduction, but NRD Companies might still need some introduction to some of our audience, which this time is extremely broad. I said good morning, good afternoon, and good evening because we really have people joining from all over the world. We appreciate your time. We'll try to stick this webinar to about 1.5 hours, and we'll try to cover all the subjects. So without talking too much about other aspects, I'd like to very briefly introduce NRD Companies. If I have the slide, please. While the slides are coming, I'll start by just saying that NRD comes from the original name, Norway Registers Development, which suggests basically the company has started in Norway as a company that has developed its first solution for the registries. Therefore, the name suggests Norway Registers Development. Over time, we've grown. Over 25 years of our existence, we've grown much broader than that. And we work very broadly with governments, with registries, with tax administrations, but also we have been working with the financial institutions, retail, national post services, and the breadth of our solutions allows us to combine different services into unique solutions that enable governments to do very unique things. We started in Norway, headquartered in Oslo. We still continue there. However, our geographical presence has followed our customers. And now we have offices in Lithuania, we have offices in Bangladesh, we have offices in Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda, and who knows what other countries are coming next. Our customer footprint has been even much broader than that. You see these little dots. These are the places where we have implemented projects. And what is very important, I think, particularly now, we are implementing these projects more and more remotely because we know it takes time to travel. So we adjusted our strategies to do that, to assist you in these difficult days. And I think Gedre, one of the persons on this panel, will be able to tell you how we been quite successful working remotely with very remote countries. Now, we consider ourselves pioneers in certain aspects of where we work because we really started as an IT company, but also over time we have gathered a strong consultancy practice, which combining these two, we can help governments not only to implement the solutions, but we help governments to decide what solutions to implement first and next. So this combination of the unique knowledge of IT aspects, but also of some legal and policy making aspects, allows us to really focus on a very broad customer segment. So we, as I mentioned already, we work with public sector, we work with finance sector, retail, and all that, all across that, we combine it with consultants. We've also seen that a lot of solutions from the finance sector fit well with the national governments. And when particularly talking about national ID, about digital ID, it's obvious that banks have been at the forefront of providing electronic services, because they're banks, they're commercial institutions. They know that customers need to be served quickly and, very importantly, cost efficiently. For governments, it has become as important. Just a few customers that we are working with in the public sector, in the finance and in the retail, and they all come, I think some of the logos you might be recognizing yourself, they come from all over the world and from all over the government sector institutions. Now, when we work, we are more and more focused on the sustainable development. We spend a lot of time looking at the work that's being done by the World Bank and by the United Nations to make sure that the decisions we make and that the technologies we implement are there for the long term and are doing good for the society. So, we work with businesses, we work with citizens, we work with governments to enable them to provide better services to either their customers or to their citizens. Now, national ID and national digital ID is one of the important aspects where a lot of successful and efficient government solutions start. But where do you start? Obviously, you start with a policy. Now, with this, I'd like to turn to our panel speakers, and they will be spending some time introducing themselves. But I would really like to mention Kostas Kapsaropoulos, who is coming from the European Commission and will cover some high political policy level aspects of why it is important to focus on the national IDs and implement it. We'll have Giedre Balchitite, our own strategy consultant, focusing on somewhat broader aspect, not only the digital part of it, but also the national part of it, which is extremely important. We'll have Vaidotas Ramonas from the National Communications Regulatory Authority, talking about how you combine the legal and technical aspects to enable those solutions to be implemented and used by the citizens. And then with Eva Tarailene, our registry practice lead, we'll have a look at a successful implementation of the national ID by one of the agencies in Lithuania. I hope you'll have an interesting morning, afternoon, or evening for some, and also a very informative evening. We appreciate your time, and I hope we'll be able to make it entertaining, but also very informative. Now with this, I'd like to invite on stage Kostas Kapsaropoulos, who's a policy officer with the European Commission. And as I mentioned, Kostas will start, where a lot of decisions start with the governments at a very high policy level. Kostas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mindaugas. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Mindaugas. Thank you, Mindaugas. As you said, governments, of course, have a very important role in deciding, but it's also necessities which have the first word. sometimes. And you have mentioned very, very well the difficult times that we have been through with COVID, which has learned even more, taught us even more how important digital means like digital identity are. I think that we will learn these lessons also, and we will keep these lessons also about the importance of digital means and digital identity when we see also the light out of the tunnel. Now, digital identity is more than the technology that helps us identify and authenticate to access services online. It's about putting the user in control of the data that defines who we are and what we do in the online world. That's why it is a key to the economic and societal growth, to securing level playing field and competitiveness, on taking the added value from data, and last but not least to self-determination. In a word, digital identity, if it is done and designed correctly, is the key to safeguarding our freedoms and sustainable growth in the digital world that we are in. That's the pillar, actually, of the IDAS regulation, of the Digital Identity and Trust Services Framework, the EU Digital Identity Framework under the IDAS. It is based on this belief for digital identity. I would like to tell you that nowadays more than 60% of the European population is covered by electronic identification means of digital identity means recognized under EIDAS around Europe. We are in a specific moment at the European Commission because we are reflecting of what has worked well, and we're going to revise what has not worked well. And we are thinking especially to extend EIDAS for more applications in the private sector. That's why we are very, very busy at the moment. And but we want to take into account the benefits of EIDAS, of digital identity under EIDAS, and we want to share them with the world. We think that digital identity under EIDAS is a model for the world because really it gives control of the user, as I said, of the data. It is a model for the world, and it is specifically a source of inspiration, I think, with high potential for sustainable growth for the emerging countries, the developing world. That's why at global level, we have taken a lot of initiatives, especially in order to make digital identity an important enabler of sustainable growth in developing countries. The first initiative is that since 2017, the European Commission has launched a Digital for Development strategy to mainstream digital technologies into EU development policy. And under priority area 4 on the use of digital technologies, it is specifically mentioned that e-government increases transparency of public institutions and involves the citizens in the decision-making process, while EIDs, electronic identification means, can improve access to public services. A second initiative, as the EU is a recognized world leader in developing and rolling out electronic identification across borders through EIDAS, the European Commission has contributed to the World Bank work on the principles on identification for sustainable development. At the same time, very recently, the European Commission has supported the Smart African Initiative, the Smart African Alliance Trust, where we have together under the Smart Africa Trust Alliance, have contributed to a blueprint on digital identity, which is very much aligned to principles and definitions and the ideas of the EIDAS model. Digital identity is a key building block to the African single market and a necessity to many elements of the African continental free trade area. That's why we have contributed to this very, very important initiative to produce the Smart Africa Blueprint under the Smart Africa Initiative, as I said. And this blueprint has recently been soft launched by the government of Benin and will shortly be published. That is for African countries more specifically, but I would like to turn to the global framework, which is also very, very, very important. We have been working very much, very intensively at the United Nations level, at the United Nations Commission of International Trade Law, where we are, where first of all, we have managed to make EIDAS, the EU model, a steady reference as a framework to build upon in the discussions on legal issues related to identity management and trust services. Now we are working on a specific legal framework, a global legal framework, which is very much aligned. It is in a draft version at the moment with EIDAS. And we hope that the United Nations Commission of International Trade Law will soon adopt this legal framework. I think to make my intervention short, digital identity is an important enabler for sustainable growth. We need to have principles very much aligned to EIDAS, we think, to make it a strong tool in the digital field today. And that's our approach also, our European approach is built on that, on the sensitivity on concerning data and making digital identity a true leverage for enabling people, citizens and businesses around the world to make take advantage of the digital. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kostas. I think this was a very good introduction to our subject and the breadth of it. And you know, you've spoken on behalf of the European Commission, which is a supranational entity that actually coordinates a lot of activities between among the different countries. And I think as we go forward and sort the national issues, the international issues will become more important. And there, what is very important is that we also try to stick to some common standards. You know, I'm very glad to say I had time, now that most of the people have joined, to look through, and I can officially declare we have people here from all 5 continents. This is, I would say, this is our 3rd webinar on some subjects, but by far this is now the broadest participation. It only shows how important this subject is. Now, some technical points as to how we will run this webinar. After every intervention by the speaker, we'll have a poll available. So on the right side of the screen, you should see the area which says chat, questions, polls, and people. Well, check those out. You can put your questions there. We'll try to do our best to answer those questions. But right now, if you open polls section, you will see a question which is somewhat related to what Kostas was talking. Please give us your answer. We'd like to see how the world looks like. But let's leave answering questions later. Kostas, thank you very much for your words. Let's move forward. And now I'd like to invite on stage Giedre Balčytytė, the Consulting Strategy Director at NRD Companies. Now, Giedre is the one who is really sits very tightly, you know, between the technology and policy. And she says technology is not the panacea. We have to get the policies right. And you know, she works with our company, and she's doing a lot of consultancy work all across the world. So Giedre, tell us all about it. The floor is yours, and I'm unmuting you right now. Please go ahead.
Hi, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mindaugas, for your kind introduction, and thank you, Kostas, for your global overview. And it's always global triples down to local, and that's what I wanted to talk about. As Mindaugas rightly pointed out, NRD is consulting all over the world and majorly in all continents, and precisely the issue of digital identity stroke recently many countries, noting the COVID situation and emerging need of digitization of public sector. So what I would like to talk about is about the functioning national identification system as precondition for digital ID, because digital ID doesn't occur from the sky or doesn't come from nowhere. It comes exactly from functioning national identification systems. And let's see what is the current situation. But before that, I was asked also to introduce briefly myself. As Mindaugas said, I'm a director of consulting strategy at NRD and supporting governments globally in digital transformations and more specifically also on identity management. I am also socio-economic advisor and international development advisor for many governments and national governments and policymakers. I was also a part of executive board at the World Bank and was taking high-level positions in the Lithuanian government. So I'm covering a broad scope of international, national, and very specific international development subjects. So when we start talking about digital identity, and as I mentioned, it all starts with establishing an identity. We always like to try to say why it is needed, why individual identity matters, and specifically now, why everyone now started to take care of to consider digital identity is precisely because the lifestyle, which was common for years, for decades, has changed a lot. And also before the COVID and other situations, we go increasingly digital. A lot of emerging and developing economies try to leapfrog and catch up and develop their systems and technologies in order to build digital systems, digital government systems, digital private sector systems and services. But at the core of it is, of course, human identity, individual identity. And definitely the precondition, the individual identity is precondition for person to exercise a range of human rights and that are inscribed in international laws and conventions, and that's what Kostas already mentioned, that it's about the rights. It's also about the inclusiveness of societies. Only when individual identity is established in society, the individuals can benefit also from services, from governmental and private services that are either physical or digital at the same time. And of course, since today we talk about digital identity and digital services, the individual identity is a precondition for digital identity and accessibility of digital services. In general, it is important to note that if you look around different countries and experiences, it is clear that weak identification systems possess a lot of challenges for countries. And it starts with the government administration, planning, including collecting taxes, targeting social programs, responding to emergencies even, and managing borders and providing security. Because you have to know who are your people, where they are, how they are, in order to be really good government, but also to be good private sector as well. So establishment of individual existence is part, of course, of different international treaties and agreements. And let's start with a Universal Human Rights Declaration, which exactly says that every person has the right to be recognized before the law, and civil registration is where this is established. And also ending up to 2015 and Sustainable Development Goals, with a target 2030 by 2030 to provide legal identity to all, including birth registration. You see, we are leaning more and more. There are two elements mentioned here, two different declarations and international agreements are mentioned here that refer to civil registration, and this is what we would like to stress, that civil registration is at the core of establishment of individual identity, is at the core of national identity management system. So it very often coming across different countries and situations, we are coming across a bit of mixing out what's come first. What's come first? Is the ID card comes first? Maybe digital ID comes first. What is first in this sequence? So we want to stress that unique identity is unique ID also, but unique ID is not ID card. So let's start from the beginning. Of course, unique identity is a set of individual features, and for years it was enough to say your name and surname, maybe date of birth, because you were not moving, you were living in one community. There was not a lot of action. But now, since the world is of course very lively place, at the moment maybe less, but it will hopefully will change, and we are moving also to virtual reality, increasingly so. So even without being physically moving, we are moving a lot in virtual reality. So establish who we are in virtual reality. Before that, we have to establish who we are in physical reality, because it may not be the same thing. And for digital environment requires us to have unique digital identity, or a unique digital identity, which is attribute of unique identification number. So individual gets identification number at birth, and this number, not his name and surname, of course, will be the denominator for different systems, information systems, to communicate between each other. And this is his identity in virtual space, in digital space, that allows government to recognize you as individual, your government, your country, and it's going forward. And I will not step into that because my colleague after me will talk more about digital identity as such. But the important feature is that it has to go together with the legal identity. Is when legal identity is being established, it's at birth, and your unique identity number is something which you carry as your second identity, or as your digital identity throughout life until your death. The death element is very important here as well. It will be explained a bit further. So unique identity is equal to unique ID. That's a vocabulary, but unique ID is not ID card. Unique ID is your set feature, a digital attribute that makes you recognizable in the digital space. So national identification system has a goal that can be described, that has to be reliable, secure, universal, sustainable, and digital identification system that supports unique legal identity, which starts at birth and is terminated at death. The second time we are mentioning this death, and I'm feeling that I'm becoming a death angel, but when we talk about individual identity in a virtual space, and in any space, in physical as well, the common problem which countries are facing, that even they're issuing a lot of documents, even they're issuing ID cards and maybe even numbers, but without civil registration, without part of civil registration and termination of death in a real time, in a digital system, and also whichever system, the individual remains living hypothetically and can, of course, perform a lot of activities without even being here on the earth. So registration of birth and death are so fundamental in this regard. So just basically to touch upon key main challenges in emerging economies which we are coming across, and these are not, of course, all of them, but just few of them. That definitely, let's start with comprehensive and reliable legal regulatory framework and identification processes. The process of identification is so important. When it starts, how it goes, who is in charge, to compliance to the full process, how to verify, how to cross-check, and how to establish the identity, and how to carry it throughout the lifespan of individual. So this element very often is missing, or is partial, or is not enforced, which is most common. There is regulation, but regulation is not enforced. Enforcement is very important. Then there are missing elements in identity systems. As I just mentioned, there are, of course, these elements exist, but they are not let's say, digital. So if we have one element digital, ID card, very often a lot of countries established ID cards, but not having civil registration digital and not integrated, which is point 3. This doesn't make much sense. It doesn't work. Systems don't talk to systems. Individual live events are not recorded. Other systems don't know whether individual is still alive, is dead, what happened with him. So this is a core. Then, of course, when there's the absence of national fundamental identity management system, there's a lot of other systems are trying to establish individual identity, as driver's license, social security, etc. Have number of codes and cards and etc. But these are not meant to be foundational systems. These are not meant for establishing individual identity, and therefore we have to go to point A, civil registration. And of course, the absence of unique identities is key obstacle for e-government solutions and services. There are partial, but at some point with some passwords, etc. But yet again, individual passes away, individual changes, something changes in his life. Other systems have no idea. You have to collect still number of papers, proofs, and etc. etc. So these are these key challenges. And when I was thinking how to present these non-comprehensive identity management systems, as in many countries they still are, this was the picture which came to my mind. It's like a house without foundation. If you have a identity management system, bits and pieces, you have second floor, maybe ID card, and maybe you are also aiming at some e-identification, but it has no basement, it has no grounding as a civil registration here. And it's not part of it, and it's not integral part of it. This house flies in the sky. The same, it's not integrated, it doesn't have pipes, electricity, etc. So you have a dysfunctional house. At some extent, you still maybe can somehow live there, but sooner or later you come to many problems. So, so without civil registration foundation and integration, your identity management house is just house in the air. This comes to the foundation and function. So this is what broadly is understood as foundational identity systems and functional identity systems. So foundational identity systems are civil registration and ID systems. It means that a foundational system is where individual identity is being established. And this individual identity may be verified by other systems, and other systems can build their systems for special purpose, for, as we just mentioned, driver's license, social security, education, you name it, tax administration. But individual identity is established there in civil registration and ID, and this is where you need to verify whether individual exists, whether it's still there, how he performs, how he can be recognized, and is he who he says he is. This is an important element. So civil registration, as I just mentioned, is a start of ID process, and wanted to show that all elements of civil registration, the processes, procedures, enforcement has to be really followed up. And we know that many countries facing challenges with birth registration, but more and more countries are facing challenges with death registration. And as I said, without having reliable civil registration system that issues unique identity number at birth and terminates it at death, you cannot think about really functioning ecosystem of identity management, neither identity nor digital identity. Unique identity number, which came in several times already here, is digital attribute of individual assigned at birth and consists of number, digits and letters, random numbers, now preferably random numbers. The global trend is not to include any biographical information into number or any biometric information, meaning by no gender, date of birth, or anything, or nationality, that anything that may be cause of discrimination. And it could be also temporary for other people who are coming to the country. It needs to be mentioned that it's not necessarily only for citizens, it's for all countries, for all people living in the country, be it temporarily or be it on permanent basis. And so this unique identity number, precisely the attribute, the feature that provides possibility for integration of different systems. And through authentication system, the population register or database which stores information on individuals can be integrated with all different systems, both public and private sector. So public, of course, very much we know about election systems, so we don't need to register for elections. We can just retrieve election lists from the system, people who are eligible to vote above 18 or whichever age, and who are living, if we have reliable identity system which starts at digitalized civil registration with a unique identity number and terminated there. So any identity, wherever verification, any other public or private sector entity that needs to verify individual identity could build on reliable national identity management system. And it goes further than with digital identity that would be reflected later. So just to sum up, the building blocks of unique identity. Unique identity number is the first building block, and the assignment of unique identity number at registration of birth and for entire life is happening during the Civil Registration Act. There is no shortcuts, there is no other way thought through, and no other possibilities to do so. So this is something I think many countries already recognized, and many countries are taking action, and rightly so, because without establishing a digital civil registry, it won't happen. Then physical identity document is, of course, assigning biometric data. Usually at a certain age, this number is strengthened with biometric data and is being issued ID document that can serve precisely for physical services by government or public sector, and the document is reliable, trusted, and serves as identity document with identity number on it, and that's how individual identity can be verified. And then it goes further on. It goes further with a digital identity means the giving people means to establish, to show who they are in a digital environment, not only in physical environment. And next presenter will talk about that more. And it ends up with digital services. So you move from your unique identity number to digital services through these stages, and this is how your national identity management system, when it's trusted, reliable, and comprehensive and complete, supports building of digital identity. So thank you very much. These are my contacts in case you would like to talk and discuss this in more details. That was a short time given. I tried to capture all of it. And as already said, at the end of this presentation, there is a poll for you to participate. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Giedre. I think I would like to best summarize your presentation with something you said the previous time we had a similar event. You said, to make people count, you have to count the people. And I think all you spoke about is really, we can talk fancy technologies, but unless we make sure we get the basics right, this is not going to work. It's just will be, a waste of technology, a waste of resources. You really have to start at the fundamentals. And I think, well, since we are basically broadcasting from Europe, I think Europe has somehow fixed that. But there's so many places all across the world where this has still needs fixing. And I know you're doing a great job advising governments of how to do it. Now, we have the results from the first poll. Not surprisingly, there's 85% who say there is a that the global digital ID framework makes a lot of sense, but we have some doubts, it seems. 15% of people still are not sure. It would be interesting to hear your opinions and your questions, maybe. In the questions field, we have had some technical questions, but feel free to also ask subject matter questions. There's already one. We'll try to answer that at the end. But as Gedre was saying, there's another poll out, so please respond to that one. But let's move on. And now I'd like to invite Vaidotas Ramonas on stage. Now, Vaidotas comes from the Lithuanian National Communications Regulatory Authority. And this is where I think we'll start building this connection between the national ID, the fundamentals, and the nice things you can build on top, and how these things are being regulated in a single country, but also in a union of countries. Vaidotas, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And so, yeah, my name is Vaidotas Ramonas. For the moment, I work for Communications Regulatory Authority as the Director of Digital Services Department. But in general, the questions like digital ID, electronic signatures, trust services, are basically making everything digital. I'm dealing for past probably 16 years. And today I've been asked to show you a bit how European examples, so how digital ID things are done in Europe. And I'm going to do that now. As I have only 15 minutes, you'll get just brief information, because no way we could spend several days talking about that. But let's go from the very beginning. And the first thing to know here is, as I call it, a legal backbone of all European system. And this is a legal instrument which is called IDAS regulation. You can see a full name on the screen. It's a European regulation, electronic identification and trust services for electronic transactions within the internal market. And this regulation actually contains main two blocks, which one of them is about electronic identification. So how to identify a person remotely, and especially in cross-border cases in a region. And the second part is about trust services. There are 9 qualified trust services that are additional tools that are necessary in order to build fully functional electronic service. So basically, with these two tools, you can build anything. It doesn't matter, that will be electronic service provided by private sector or by government. Yeah, and now let's go a bit further. I'm going to briefly introduce few aspects I see that are quite important about electronic identification. And the first thing here is that IDAS regulation defines several assurance levels of electronic identification schemes or electronic identification means, like low, substantial, and high. And I think that's very good approach, at least have several levels. And the reason for that is that usually security and usability are on the different sides of the scale. So having several levels of electronic identification means electronic service provider can say what minimal assurance level is enough to get his service. For instance, if you want to get a license to sell ice cream on the street, probably low will be enough. But that's completely other story if you would like to get electronic license to sell guns or, I don't know, medicine. So that's why I think it's quite important here. Another thing is a second point, a third point is about regional approach which is chosen, because according to IDAS regulation, each EU country has a right to notify its own electronic identification scheme or schemes. And for instance, it could be ID card. And on the other hand, with some preconditions, of course, other countries must recognize these schemes while providing electronic services in their countries. And if talking about technical things a bit, IDAS regulation sets a decentralized technical approach, partly decentralized. There is no one central e-identification system. Each country has a thing which is called IDAS node, and all communication between countries are done via IDAS nodes. Yeah, so that's how, in a nutshell, electronic identification structure in Europe looks like. Later on, I'm going to show you how it could fit while building electronic service. Okay, so that was the first part. Now let's talk a bit about second part, which is trust services. And here on the screen, actually, you can see all 9 qualified trust services listed within 5 main building blocks. And I placed these services, I grouped these services intentionally. And the first block is about electronic signatures. So basically, if you have some paper-based process, the handwritten signature is required, you should look at the first block. And here you'll find a trust service, which is issuance of certificates for electronic signature. Basically, issuance of a tool to sign documents electronically. Fine, you have a tool to sign document. Second one is about validation. You can validate document, of course, by yourself. You can get a service from the market. And this service would be called validation of electronic signatures. And the next thing is about preservation. Because usually if you have document, you need to preserve them, basically for further legal proceedings, or maybe because it is required by the law. So you could do, of course, it by yourself, or you could get a preservation service from the market. Yeah, so that's how the first block looks like. A tool to sign, tool to validate, and tool to preserve. Okay, let's look at the second block. It is about electronic seals, and it contains actually the same 3 services, like issuance of certificates for seal, validation of seals, preservation of seals. The only difference here is that first, electronic signature is meant to be used by physical persons and is equivalent to handwritten signature, in case it's qualified. Electronic seals are meant to be used by legal entities, and electronic seal ensures integrity and authenticity of data. So basically, in order to decide which block it could be useful for you, let's look what you want to reach. Third block is about timestamping. It has only one service, timestamping. The idea of the service is to attach time to the data and ensure integrity of the data. Basically, if you have a need to fix some data in time, to be sure that this particular data existed in that particular moment in time, you could use timestamping service. And if talking about use cases, one use case is long-term validation of electronic signatures, or just validation of electronic signatures, because if you might need to know whether that signature was created while signature certificate was valid. So that reason can use timestamping. But additionally to that, you could use timestamping for many other things. For instance, electronic transactions within banking system, if you want to be sure that that transaction happened until that precise moment in time. Yeah, so that's the 7th service. Let's go further. Next one is about electronic registry delivery service. I don't have much to tell about it because it talks for itself. Like in physical world, sometimes you need to deliver a paper document and be sure that the exact person received it. So in digital world, you could use that electronic registry delivery service and reach the same objective with electronic document. And the last one is about website authentication. Actually, it's again the service about issuance of certificates. But in this case, certificate is not issued to a natural person, not to a legal person, but basically to the website in order to provide information that the website is really owned by that physical or legal entity. Yeah, so that's how all these qualified trust services look like. And now probably some of you think that, oh, come on, yeah, there is a regulation, there are some services, but how European market looks like, how many providers do they have there? Is it live? And now on the screen, you can see just a map. I took this information several days ago. Information is changing, but for the moment, we have more than 200 qualified trust service providers within all EU and providing either one or even several services. Basically, one provider could provide 3, 4, or even more qualified trust services. Yeah, so that's quite a live system. And now a simple picture, it's quite old one, but it shows how all these qualified trust services could be used in order to build fully functional electronic service. Of course, some of you might think that, come on, I don't need timestamping for my service or like electronic register delivery service. Yes, and you will be completely right. It's just an example to show what benefit each of the service could bring to you. And in each case, you should model your service by yourself. But let's look how it could look. For instance, I'm a physical person. I would like to establish a company in digital way. first thing what I need to do is to find a website portal where I could do that. Yeah, and be sure that that portal is really owned by that government agency. So that's why I could use website authentication service. Next step, that the government agency might need to know who I am, that I'm really the person I claim to be. For that reason, we could use EIDs, electronic identification. Okay. Next thing, I'm already in the portal and identified. I'll sign I'll create a document like request to establish a company. Probably I will be asked to sign it or seal it. Yeah, I have the tools, I'll do that. Next thing, sometimes time matters. For instance, proof that document was submitted in due time. For that reason, we could use timestamping service. And again, we will use that for validation a bit later on. Okay, so my document is signed, timestamp, and government agency needs to validate that the signature is valid. And it could use validation services for that reason. And if everything's fine, that agency could use electronic registry delivery service just to deliver me proof that, okay, we have received your request, or here is your bill, or like it is acknowledgement of receipt of your document. And for that reason, sometimes we might be need to use a registry delivery service just to be sure that that person really received it. And of course, a final stage, preservation of all evidence, all documents that appeared in this time. Yeah, so that's how this system could be used. And with that, I would like to finish my first part talking about IDAS regulation as it. And now I would like to just discuss a few points why IDAS. For instance, if I would be another country, why it should choose IDAS regulation. And probably, or this IDAS framework, probably there could be very different opinions, different points, but I would like to stress today 3 of them. And the first would be, at least in my personal opinion, it's really most comprehensive framework as I've seen in all the world. And that's the reason, first reason, it is legal document covering all the needed aspects. But it's not only a legal document. IDAS regulation is fully backed up by technical standards. So there are technical standards explaining how you could implement it. And even more, there are guidelines explaining, for instance, how to apply technical standards. So basically, you get a full kit here. Okay, next thing, it's actually IDAS regulation is suitable, at least in my personal opinion, both for national and regional implementations. You can take it as a standalone country and implement it. But again, if you're a region, you can take it and implement it within your region, because it is already used within a region, European Union region. So it has all the necessary components already. And next part, yeah, it's like it can be used by a country, any country, region. It's not meant to be used only within Europe. It is mandatory for European countries, but it could still be used in other places as well. And even the very nice benefit, if the country will decide to fully implement IDAS regulation and will reach an agreement, will sign an agreement with the European Commission, all the trust services of that country would be recognized within EU as equals, and vice versa. There are some preconditions for that. They are quite simple. In a nutshell, please implement all the requirements, do exactly the same like European countries do, recognize European services, and your services will be recognized. So you just need to sign an agreement with European Commission on that. Yeah, and the last slide probably is, my slide will contain only 2 words, getting started. Actually, just few ideas. If someone of you will decide to go IDAS way from nothing, actually, I think that the first thing to do is just to set a game rules basically, and which should be done by government, to define what are trust services, to define how EID things will work. And this should be done by government because it's a legal thing. And a good story here, because you can take IDAS regulation almost as it is. And that's probably won't be a very difficult step. But after that, you'll reach second stage. A second stage is like I call it a chicken and egg problem. And chicken and egg problem because will be very difficult to convince electronic service providers to build electronic services or to make their services electronic, because there won't be any clients who could use them on one hand. But on the other hand, it will be very difficult to convince people to get EIDs or some tools to sign documents, etc., because there are no services that they can use these tools. And here again, it depends on a country how to solve this issue, but here again, government could act as well. For instance, while providing initial ID tools for their citizens, like EID cards, which could be used to identify themselves or to sign something. That's an example. Additionally to that, government together with private sector of the business, we could look for icebreaker services. These are services I call because you need to find a service which is widely used by the people, or which is used and very expensive. And you could try to make these services digital and cheaper, faster, more convenient. Because if you'll take a service which is not used by anyone and make it digital, it won't work. You'll have a checkbox like we have one, but it won't move the thing. Yeah, so with that, I would like to end my presentation. And here you can see my contacts as well. But so if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. Or later on, we probably have a questions answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaidotas. This was, a very quick and very still in-depth presentation. And I think you touched a very important aspect of the fact that there are standards available, and particularly the European standard is a very comprehensive one. And I think what is very important, it's an open standard in the sense that it would help to connect the world. I remember a lot of discussions between that I had a chance to participate between the European Union and the African Union about how we can make those standards work together. Little happened, but we have, I think, a good foundation. Let's leave it for the questions part, because I think Kostas would like to intervene into that subject as well. But let's have a look at the poll. The last question was, identity management system in your country includes, and it lists several levels. And as you can see, the picture here is somewhat more varied. We have a strong intention to have a digital global ID, but we can clearly see the countries are at a different stage still. So some are ahead, some others have catching up to do. So I think it's another reason we should keep this dialogue going, so that those countries that are catching up are learning from the mistakes that have been done, are learning from the best practices that have been applied in the past. And this sort of makes a nice segue into our next discussion, because we already have good examples of how digital ID systems have been implemented and national ID systems have been implemented. And I would like to invite on stage Yeva Tarailene, who is the head of registry practice with NRD Companies. Now, she's very well qualified to talk about this because she's been doing that herself for a number of years before joining NRD Companies. So, Yeva, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mindaugas. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And today I'm going to speak what does it take to introduce the digital ID in the country. And this practical case study, it will be from Lithuania country. First of all, I would like to introduce myself, but okay, it works. So, as Mindaugas introduced, today I am a head of registry practice in NRD, but I joined this great team only last year after 17 years of experience in working in the State Enterprise Center of Registers. And I started from junior lawyer and climbed up the corporate ladder to become an acting CEO in this company, in this enterprise. But I had an opportunity personally participate in establishing of certification authority in Lithuania. And as I was a leader of establishment and development of register of legal entities and electronic services, so I had really great experience there. And let me share with you some insights from that period. But first of all, I would like to introduce my country. This small dot in the map is Lithuania. It's a northern European country with capital Vilnius and less than 3 million population. But when we talk about digital Lithuania, I can proudly say that sciences, information technology, and engineering sectors in Lithuania are among the fastest growing and most advanced in the region. So I'm very proud to be here to represent the case study from Lithuania. And let's go to EID journey. But first of all, we have to go back to almost 20 years ago. In 2003, the legal environment for electronic signature was formed. It means that we already had law on electronic signature. We had government resolutions on requirements for certification service providers. We had lots of requirements for electronic signature verification procedure, for time-stamping service procedure, and so on. In other words, the legal environment has been prepared. But still, why such situation arose that in 2006 there were no public electronic services and there were no qualified certificate providers. And from my point of view, we were in such situation because there was no integrated organizational, technological, and legal environment. There was a lack of state influence and encouragement. IT business didn't see real benefit from it. And of course, state and business structure didn't see benefit as well. And there were no effective examples to follow. As Vaidotas already mentioned, we had this dilemma: which came first, egg or chicken? So which should come first, certification service provider or public-private electronic services? Of course, there was a question why we should invest in developing infrastructure for electronic signature if we don't have e-services in place, and vice versa. Why do we need to create electronic services if no one uses e-signature? But maybe we were lucky because at the same time, special attention in Europe was paid to develop of electronic services for registration of legal entities, legal persons, their data and documents. The first directive, the first European Council directive stated that companies must be able to submit data and documents to the register by electronic means. And in 2007, there were a few European countries which already had e-services for submission documents to the register. And of course, a few of them already had e-signature infrastructure. Anyway, this topic became a priority for the government. And I want to mention that from very beginning, it was clear that for authentication and for document signing, electronic signature shall be used. So let's move on. And we have 2007. In 2007, it was obvious that we can't no longer wait for a qualified electronic certificate provider to appear in the state. Quick and out-of-the-box solutions were needed at that time. And the Center of Register, which was and of course is a center of excellence, IT excellence for public sector, which is responsible for development and handling state registries, information systems, and e-government services. This enterprise took a leadership in this area and has decided to undertake an additional function as Center of Certification. And the year of 2008 was a turning point when the Center of Registers established a certification center, which started issuing qualified certificates for authentication and for signature. One certificate with two parts. And establishment of such center has been decided by the period itself, because it was clear that development and offering electronic services of good quality is a new normal. It should be at that time. And in 2008, very organically, the Center of Registers started to develop electronic services for business. And as I already mentioned, one of the best, I think, decision was made at that time that we have to use qualified certificates for users' authentication and document signing. It was a good decision not to use static identifiers such as passwords or emails, because there are no ways to accurately determine the identity of a person in a digital space. And of course, it was already decided that only digitally signed documents will be accepted by the registry. And the reasons why such decision has been made, because as I already said, and then Vaidotas explained, qualified digital certificate holds authentication part and document signing part. So it means that a digital certificate intended for personal identification builds trust remotely, and a digital certificate intended for signing ensures the validity of the data. And I believe that this chosen decision and further government support for the use of an qualified certificate in provided electronic services has led to widespread use of e-signature in the country. And many of us today do not even imagine our daily lives without e-signature. And let's go on, and I would like to introduce some observation in using e-signature during the legal entities registration process. It's quite a popular service, because if you want to open business, you need to register your company, as Vaidotas said, that first of all, you need to choose some e-service which will be very popular in your country. So we observe that when you use e-signature, when you use qualified certificate, it allows to ensure the secure electronic submission. And verification and validation of physical signature. Signature is not longer needed. The identity and the rights of the persons are automatically verified, and a timestamp is automatically applied to the submitted document. And of course, it stipulated a significant increase of online submission, online data provision, and the time required for such a registration was significantly shorter. So, this is my final slide, and I would like to overview the current situation with electronic ID in Lithuania. More than 55% of the total population has a valid qualified certificate for electronic signature. 1,500,000 certificates are in Lithuania. And more than half of total qualified certificates are issued in SIM cards. In other words, users use mobile signature. For example, as me, my signature every time with me, because my phone every time with me as well. And more than around 40 million documents which are in the center of registers are signed electronically. So these numbers talks quite well. And today in Lithuania we have several qualified trust service providers. Two are state authorities, state agencies, and we have 4 telecommunication companies which provides electronic ID and trusted service as well. And where we can use this certificate, this electronic ID today, I can say we can use everywhere in the digital space. We can use it in e-banking, we can use it in using public e-services, e-government portal, and so on. We can sign, of course, we can sign documents, and we can even use it in our private life, in our private, using private e-services, contacting with business partners, clients, and so on, signing documents, and etc. So I almost done, but in conclusion, I would like to note, to mention that today we have more than, 50 different countries which representatives from these countries joined this webinar. We have policymakers, we have representatives from different state institutions. So I would like to encourage you to take leadership. Sometimes you need to think a little bit out of the box. Just use all opportunities, move forward. And I believe that you can introduce the best ID, digital ID solution, the best e-services in your country, and it will be my pleasure, and I think that my team's pleasure as well, to help you, to assist you, and to consult you how to start and how to continue your digital journey. So thank you for your time. Mindaugas, I just want to give you the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think this has been an interesting story about the journey in Lithuania, which happened, actually I had lost my account before I saw the number. Back in 2008, we already have a digital signature. To be honest, right now, there are still places where I can't use it, and Lithuanian can't use it. But if I can't use it, I'm very, very annoyed. To be honest, this is something that it's a the new piece in the Maslow pyramid. You remember this? We have Wi-Fi. I think now we should put the digital ID into the same category of things. But let's move with the questions. We have a couple now. Now, before we go, I'd like to talk to Kostas now. He's been the first to come on stage. And look, we spoke about a lot of developments that happen on the national level and on the international level. And I mentioned that I've been myself part of the discussion between the European and African unions. Are you aware of really practical initiatives across the countries that would make these things easier to connect those countries that are already ready to do that? You are unmuted, Kostas. You can just speak up. The question is really about.
Yes, thank you, thank you, McDonald's, and thank you, McDonald's. And really, I was impressed by the quality and the level of the presentations. They were very, very informative. They were very, very useful. And also, I would suggest also internally in the Commission to use some of them in order to raise awareness of the IDAS especially, and of what is happening in the country. Really well done. Also, second part, as you understood, because I didn't present me perhaps completely in the beginning, I'm working for the unit, the IDAS unit, responsible for e-government and the eIDAS regulation at the DG Connect, Director General Connect of the European Commission. The second point is that I would like to share the urge of Eva, what she said about making use of the digital identity, make use of the full potential, introduce it first. And also this is a good opportunity to say that also EU countries which have not notified their EID schemes, I really urge them and encourage them to come up front and notify their EID schemes, because as EIDAS experts know, a notification is a first important step to have the EID schemes mutually recognized across Europe. Up to now, there are 14 member states which have notified. I encourage also the other member states, some of them to make a national EID scheme, and the others who have made it to come and notify it. It's about sharing for citizens and businesses of these countries the potential of EIDAS, of digital identity in the modern world. And that was for the European front. And to come to your question, McDonald's, I don't know if you mean about Africa. For example, I mentioned the blueprint for Africa, and that it could be a very, very useful blueprint, as we called it, a very good project for countries to make use of principles, for example, which are aligned with the EIDAS, in order to connect themselves and to build the African single digital market. It has enormous potential for growth for these countries, especially taking into account the increase of the population, the increase of digitization in African countries. They all have to gain from it. And Europe is ready to help, and we are doing it in all instances.
Well, thank you. I think that to Vaidota's point, it's also important to stress that eIDAS is an open system for other countries to connect, to use exactly the same standards so that we have the full interoperability. It would be so easy, you know, to sit here anywhere in Europe, or for that matter, anywhere in Africa, and establish a company in another country or open a bank account with the full knowledge that, you know, you are dealing with the person who he says he is.
I would like also to come back also to an interesting point that Valdotas made. It is about how third countries can get recognized their trust services with EIDAS. Valdotas touched about it in a very, very simple and very nice way of explaining to people how this happens. It is the famous Article 14 that is in EIDAS regulation, which foresees mutual recognition of third countries' trust services with the EU trust services, if there is reciprocity, of course, and if they have they share the same quality standards as we are doing in the EU. That's very important. Of course, this can become true through a formal international agreement, which makes things a bit more difficult. We need a mandate to negotiate. The Commission needs a mandate to negotiate from the member states. And then we have to have formal negotiations with the third country to make this international agreement happen and to have mutual recognition. Up to now, but there is the possibility in the EIDAS, and we do not have to forget it. Up to now, there is no, despite the fact that the European Union has been very much solicited by third countries, there is an increasing interest from Africa, from Ukraine, from Japan, from many third countries which want to have their trust service mutually recognized. They have come to us with interest in this Article 14 clause for the mutual recognition. Up to now, of course, no international agreement has been concluded. But at the same time, that's why I mentioned also in my introduction the global framework that we are building at United Nations level. We invest very much in that, because if finally there is an adoption of a model law on identity management and trust services at UN level, which we hope could be aligned with EIDAS, that would be really a much added value to create a global framework instead of dealing bilaterally with each country.
Thank you, Kostas. I mean, it's music to my ears to hear that it's opening up, and there's gonna be much more business in making this work. Not only on building the infrastructure, but once you have that, of course, all the services follow. Opening a bank account, voting, employment, healthcare, and all that kind of stuff. This is going to be big and beautiful. Let's move on. We have actually concluded the last poll we had. Look at it, interesting results. Again, a very varied picture across what methods are being used to identify individuals. Again, suggests there's still ways to settle the standard and go forward with a sort of interoperability. You can comment those poll results as I address you with other questions as well. But now I'd like to turn to Giedre, because there were actually some specific questions addressed specifically to Giedre when you were presenting. The first, I think, comes from Tonis. And Tonis Maya asks, the random number unique ID is preferable, you said. It's very hard to remember. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Tonis, for the question. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Tonis, for your question. It's a good question. We're facing this question in many countries and environments. It depends on length of number. You're right. It's difficult to remember, but we have always this reference to your cell phone number. How many figures, how many numbers you have in your cell phone number. And normally, regularly, people do remember cell phone numbers, at least yours, you do remember. So if it's, in our case, it's 9. So 9 is something which individual brain still managed to remember, even if it's random numbers, even if it doesn't have any information in it. Of course, the number of numbers depends on the size of country. We're working in different countries now, but in particular in small island states where populations are around 100,000 or 200,000. So definitely the length of the unique number can vary also in this regard. So there's no maybe need to have a very long number. So even some countries tend to put a lot of information in them. And it is a recommendation. It's not that it's obligation, it's trend, it's a recommendation that by number you should not be able to disincentivize individual against any services, to discriminate because of gender, because of age, because of nationality, ethnicity. So that's why this suggestion, that's why this recommendation, and the reference to cell phone number, I think, is a good one for people to still think that yes, maybe I can remember this number.
Yeah, well, thank you, Giedre. There's a couple of other questions. There was one very specific about the use of standard. Now, I've seen the reference to this standard with our technical team, especially working on the cybersecurity. I can't comment on it unless you would like anyone to comment. The question that came from Sanjay Yeshi, but yeah, we are aware of this standard and we use it in the implementation, but this is for a more in-depth technical discussion. While I'm searching for other questions, I have another one. We are talking about this. The trigger was COVID-19, because we suddenly realized we need all those services. And has there been some services that stood out in terms of usage that it was extremely useful to have them? Vaidotas, you come from the Communications Authority. I think you are monitoring such things. Has there been any surges in use for some specific purpose?
Yeah, actually, I have 2 parts of statistics. One is about each year we ask people whether they use electronic signature, just to know where the direction is going.
We've been having issues with Vaidotas connection throughout the day, and oh, you're back. Okay,
Yeah, I'm back. Just yes, sorry. Yeah, so we, and what we saw that, for instance, in several months from the very beginning of March, after 2 months when quarantine started, we had a rise by 6%. So 6% more people started using digital signatures. That's one thing. Another very interesting number is about actual use of actual number of signed electronic documents. In Lithuania, they have some companies which provide signing services for various private and public authorities, and we asked them how their system looked like on the 16th of March, the day then quarantine was enabled in Lithuania. And actually, from the very morning of 16th of March, the system said that numbers of signed documents rise from 30%, in some systems by 30%, in some systems by 120%. So basically in the very morning. So that means that these are people who already knew how to sign documents, already had tools, but just at that moment thought that, okay, we'll digitize a bit more services. So that's an amazing figure. And actually, I'm a bit sad that they haven't performed the same assessment like now, because I think that more and more people learned how to do that. So at this time, numbers should be even bigger. Yeah, but that definitely affected. And what I say to my colleagues, I did a lot of work to raise awareness, but signature is good. Digital services is an amazing thing, and it can rise numbers a bit. But now only one COVID, it rise by 6% in 2 months. So basically done almost several years of my work. So it really affects the use of such tools.
Yeah, thank you, Vaidotas. Actually, we have two related questions, and I think these days when you talk about technologies, it's hard to somehow skip the subject of the use of blockchain. And while it's a very technical discussion, I would say, but we've seen big surges in blockchain over time, and now it seems to be sort of just yet another technology that's around there. And my personal take on that is that why would you change the technology that has proven to work and that is still has a long way to go in, and we need to fix a lot of basics. And blockchain technology as such does not support very well centralized authorities. I mean, it's meant to operate without a centralized authority. That would be the main purpose to introduce that. But once you have that, and I think to get these points, once you have the good working national civil registration, that's the fundamental thing, you can start building on top of that. But for that, you need a centralized approach across the country to identify and count all the people. I'm unmuting you, Gedre, if you want to chip in, because I think I also have another question for you, which was about
Zamanov, sorry, it's just difficult to read.
So the question is whether you absolutely need a very solid internet infrastructure in the country to implement the National Digital ID. What's your experience?
That's a very good question, and I like also another part of it, which talks about strong political will.
Yeah.
Let's start with that. You know, you can have amazing infrastructure, good technology, great institutions, people, but if you don't have political will, very few things can fly. So when you're talking about the strong political will, now the current technology with the mobile technology being present and really affordable and available in so many countries. Okay, there are still countries and places where it's not covering, but in a broad sense, it's really developing so fast. It's improving so fast, and you know it's something which 5 years ago was not yet the case, and now it is. So mobile technology is really broadly covering that, and also hybrid technology with the cloud solutions and everything like that. So the more we hear leading consultancy work in countries, where we're consulting on how to introduce technology and how to digitalize governments, the more it shows that technology is not an issue in many places. You know, it's not increasingly not an issue, but really political will, organizational capacities, compliance to processes and procedures is something which has to be followed, which has to be thought through. So we're going back to square one. You know, you cannot do square five or roof, build a roof without having this basement and bases. And yes, mobile technology can really serve service where broadband not. But at the same time, what we need to mention that many countries with the support of development partners have been introducing a lot of infrastructure, internet infrastructure in the countries, and these are countries across the world, and it's increasingly functioning and reliable infrastructure is being built in many countries. So you know, you shouldn't wait for something to happen in order to do your basic homework. Do compliant work. If you try to register everyone and etc., it will come. You will have possibility to utilize the infrastructure. But if you wait for infrastructure and then start to prepare for the things, then you just delay the entire process.
Yeah.
So it is another. It's also answering, I hope so, the Sangai's question for digital infrastructure, internet backbone. So it's about the same. You know, the backbone in many countries it is there, but you have to utilize also mobile infrastructure.
Great, thank you, Gedre. Look, we're sort of coming to an end, but this one very important question that's coming from Richard Kaibanda, our good friend, the speaker of our previous webinar, the Registrar General from Rwanda. And when I read the question, I think, yeah, I haven't even thought about it, but it's a very important one about the some regions in the world that have lower literacy rates. Would low literacy be an impediment to implement the EID? Or could it be turned into an enabler? I mean, Gedre, I was thinking you might want to answer that, but please, anyone can chip in on this question. I think that's a very important one. Kostas, maybe you have some thoughts on this? Sorry, I will be unmuting you. Yes, you are now on mute.
Yes, thank you, Magdonas. And really, once again, we have talked before many times about chicken and egg problems and all that. I think, first of all, digital skills is important not only in Africa, but everywhere. So we need more digital skills, not only in Africa, but everywhere. And on the other way around, EID can help build skills. So I wouldn't say that the literacy problem is a problem as such. It's building an EID can help with literacy and skills, and also building skills can help also with digital enablers. And of course, once again, digital identity as identity itself in the physical world, it's very much linked to the mentality, to the culture, to the history, to the conditions of the country. So it's up to each country to see how it will enable having good identity mechanisms, either in the physical or in the virtual world. That's what I can say.
Well, thank you very much. We have a couple of other questions, but somehow we are out of time. And I think this has been a good, this is a good way to stop, because I think we've spoken about the technology and how to implement that, about the policy aspects, about the technology aspects, how to combine these things. But this question from Richard made me think that, in fact, as you, Kostas, were saying, it could also become an enabler. When you think about the digital ID and the widespread use of phones, for example, in Africa and other regions, in even more phones, probably as a percentage of digital devices being used in emerging countries, I think this gives a new opportunities to look at technologies in a different way, to somehow enable digital literacy, skipping over the literacy. I mean, we should deal with all these issues, but I think digital ID could provide tools to people who are underserved for now. And this could be a very good opportunity to to look also from the overall country's development and sort of trying to make the playing field level for those who live in the capital cities and for those who live in the remote areas. The accessibility to services would be so much easier. But I'd like again to come to Gedre's words. I like them very much. To make people count, we have to count the people, right? So we have to start with the national ID and then digitize that national ID, not the other way around. Look, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the audience who's been asking questions actively, and I hope we'll continue this dialogue through other means. Please feel free to reach out. You have our contacts. You can connect to us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and the usual places. And I'm sure this was definitely not the last discussion about the subject. Thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to see you soon at our next events. And hopefully very soon to see you all live. Thank you all. Bye-bye.